Imagine entire cities emptied overnight, streets silent, and markets abandoned, all because of invisible enemies. Plagues are more than diseases. They are forces that have shaped human history. From the Black Death in Europe to mysterious epidemics in ancient civilizations, these outbreaks changed societies, economies, and even religions. Some of the greatest empires were forever altered because of deadly pathogens. Today, we explore the terrifying plagues that shaped civilizations, revealing their devastating impact and the resilience of humans in response. The first major epidemic struck Athens during the Peloponnesian War, around 430 BC. Known as the Plague of Athens, it killed perhaps 1/3 of the city's population, including soldiers and civilians alike. Historical accounts describe fever, vomiting, and terrible suffering that spread through crowded streets. Entire families perished, leaving homes abandoned and neighborhoods deserted. The city's defenses and morale crumbled as the population struggled to cope with the devastation. Panic, lawlessness, and despair grew alongside the disease. Doctors and priests were powerless, and fear of the unknown intensified human suffering. Social, political, and military systems were destabilized, and trust in leadership eroded. Streets were eerily silent, and social norms broke down. The Plague of Athens remains a chilling example of how disease can determine the fate of civilizations. In the Roman Empire, the Antonine Plague struck soldiers returning from campaigns in the east, likely smallpox or measles. It killed millions over 15 years, severely weakening the empire. Economically, it caused labor shortages, reduced tax revenue, and disrupted trade networks across cities. Fear and superstition grew as people believed the gods were punishing humanity. Markets emptied, homes were abandoned, and public life nearly ceased. The Roman army struggled to maintain control of its borders, creating political instability. Families fled cities or abandoned the sick, while governments imposed quarantine measures with limited success. Hospitals were overcrowded, and mortality rates were staggering. The epidemic demonstrates the fragility of even the most powerful empires when faced with disease. Social life collapsed, and cultural life was altered. The Antonine Plague shaped Roman history in ways still studied by historians today. The Plague of Justinian struck Constantinople during the Byzantine Empire, killing tens of thousands daily. Bubonic plague, carried by fleas on rats, spread quickly along trade routes, decimating populations in cities and rural regions alike. Economic collapse followed as markets closed, farms were abandoned, and tax revenue dropped sharply. Military campaigns stalled, leaving the empire vulnerable to external attacks. Mass graves and overwhelmed hospitals became a grim reality. Social and religious life were disrupted, with fear and superstition dominating daily life. The plague recurred in waves for centuries, weakening the empire further. Urban centers struggled to maintain infrastructure, and famine often followed outbreaks. Leaders faced immense pressure, and citizens lost faith in traditional governance. Long-term consequences reshaped political structures and urban planning. The Plague of Justinian reshaped Byzantine society and demonstrates the power of disease to influence empires. The infamous Black Death swept across Europe, killing an estimated 30–50% of the population. Cities were emptied, farms untended, and feudal structures weakened as entire communities perished. Survivors gained new economic opportunities as labor shortages increased wages and altered social hierarchies. Religious institutions struggled to maintain authority, while mystics and cults claimed divine explanations for the plague. The disease spread rapidly via fleas on rats, traveling along trade routes and ships. Art, literature, and culture reflected the omnipresence of death and despair. Public health responses were primitive but evolving, with quarantines and isolation practices beginning to emerge. Social unrest, fear, and panic were common. Entire generations were lost, and urban demographics shifted dramatically. The Black Death forever transformed Europe, leaving deep demographic, cultural, and economic consequences that lasted generations. When European explorers arrived in the Americas, smallpox devastated indigenous populations. Civilizations like the Aztec and Inca were unprepared for this foreign disease, which spread faster than any army. Entire communities vanished, leaving survivors weakened and vulnerable to conquest. Trade, agriculture, and social structures collapsed, with abandoned cities and fields. European colonizers unintentionally, or sometimes intentionally, accelerated the disease's spread. Smallpox permanently reshaped the demographic and political landscape of the New World. Survivors adapted, but loss of life was catastrophic. During the 19th century, cholera spread rapidly through cities in Europe and Asia, killing tens of thousands. The disease traveled via contaminated water, showing the critical need for sanitation. Urban populations were dense, and the lack of modern medicine worsened mortality. Governments implemented quarantines, restricted gatherings, and attempted rudimentary treatments. Social unrest and fear often accompanied outbreaks, with protests and panic in major cities. Cholera epidemics influenced urban planning, including sewage, water supply, and hygiene systems. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and doctors worked tirelessly to contain the disease. Scientific study of cholera led to breakthroughs in epidemiology and disease prevention. Cities were redesigned to prevent future outbreaks, influencing public health for decades. Communities gradually learned to combat the spread through knowledge and adaptation. The epidemics left an enduring mark on medical history. The Spanish flu pandemic killed tens of millions worldwide, spreading quickly in the era of global travel. Soldiers returning from World War I carried the virus across continents, infecting entire cities. Symptoms were violent and rapid, overwhelming hospitals and medical systems. Governments imposed quarantines, closed public spaces, and restricted travel. Economies faltered, with businesses shutting down and essential services disrupted. Fear and panic dominated daily life, and cultural events were canceled. Scientific research into viruses accelerated as a result, influencing modern medicine and vaccine development. Communities learned the importance of hygiene, social distancing, and public health coordination. Mortality rates among young adults were unusually high, amplifying social and emotional impact. Lessons from the Spanish flu shaped global pandemic preparedness in the modern era. Plagues have profoundly shaped belief systems and culture. During epidemics, people turned to religion, rituals, and superstition, believing divine forces caused suffering. Some societies persecuted minorities, blaming them for outbreaks. Art, literature, and music reflected mortality, fear, and existential questions. Public rituals, quarantines, and new customs emerged to cope with disease. Festivals were canceled, marketplaces closed, and urban planning adapted to reduce contagion. Plagues influenced moral codes, legal practices, and societal structures. Communities developed systems for caring for the sick and burying the dead safely. The psychological impact of epidemics changed how civilizations thought about life, death, and fate. Religious, social, and cultural landscapes were permanently altered by these crises. Plagues forced societies to question authority, faith, and social norms. Plagues forced civilizations to innovate in medicine, sanitation, and urban planning. Ancient quarantines and isolation practices gradually evolved into structured healthcare systems. Observing patterns of contagion led to early epidemiology, vaccination, and hygiene awareness. Cities redesigned water supply, sewage, and waste management to prevent future outbreaks. Lessons learned over centuries still guide modern public health policy. Governments, hospitals, and communities adapted, understanding the critical importance of preparedness. Epidemics drove scientific discovery and social innovation. Knowledge gained from past plagues informs responses to modern pandemics. Public awareness, health education, and disease surveillance are direct legacies of these historical crises. Communities learn the value of coordinated response, data collection, and rapid intervention. Humanity learned that preparation and science are vital in combating infectious threats. Plagues are reminders that humanity, despite achievements, is vulnerable to nature's unseen forces. They teach lessons of resilience, adaptation, and the importance of science and community. While devastating, plagues also sparked innovation, social change, and global awareness. Studying these outbreaks helps us understand human history and the evolution of societies. Each epidemic reshaped economies, governments, and culture, leaving marks that still guide us today.